Hello and welcome to Showbiz Buzz with Bruno, presented by Mads Theater. I'm Michael Bruno, your host, and today I'm so excited to bring back a very dear friend of mine who wrote this amazing book. Please welcome to the show, Jeff Copeland. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Bruno. I'm so glad to be here.
So we're talking about the fact that you have now published the lovely, lovely, love you madly, Hollywood. I'm trying to get the glare out of there. There we go. Which is kind of like your follow-up to Low Life and High Heels, which was your first collaboration with Holly. Is that right?
That's correct.
And tell me again the timeline of how it went from getting that first book done with Holly and then coming to the point now where you wrote about Love You Madly.
Okay, so A Low Life and High Heels came out in 1991. Holly and I met in 1998. The book was released in 1991. And, Holly was my best friend. She meant the world to me. I mean, Holly was the first person of note to really give me a break as a writer. But something happened. Something really bad happened during the course of our friendship. And unfortunately what happened was I had to start all over from square one with my career, and went to television. I became a writer producer, and I think it was back in 2016, about a year after Holly died. I was in my living room and I was just kind of like taking stock of my career and recalling all the shows and stuff, and none of them compared to the wonderful magical whirlwind that I experienced with Holly Woodlawn. And so I thought, you better write these memories down while you can still recall them, because my father had Alzheimer's, my mother was struggling with dementia, and I didn't want to forget. And I figured if I ever did forget, I would have a record and people could read them to me when I was, locked up in the hospital. But anyway, so when I got to page 100 of these memories, I thought, well, what the hell is this? Surely it's not going to be a book. But as I continued to write, I realized that this is what it was turning out to be. So what happened was I started querying agents to see if I could get some interest, and no one was interested. So I got discouraged and I shelved it. Then flash forward to 2019, I wind up moving back to the Midwest to look after my parents, and decided to pick it up again. And by 2020, I had like a 425 page manuscript, and I started shopping it again, and still very little response, mostly crickets. Yeah, the joy of being a writer.
Isn't that true? Isn't that true? Tell people who may not know who Holly Woodlawn was.
Well, Holly Woodlawn was an Andy Warhol superstar. Okay, she starred in two of Andy Warhol's movies. One was Trash, another was Women in Revolt. And she was also immortalized by Lou Reed in his classic hit Walk on the Wild Side. It starts off about Holly. Holly came from Miami, FLA, and so that was back in the 70s when she really had her heyday. By the time I met Holly in 1988, she was pretty much a washed up alcoholic who was desperate to, find herself. She had left New York. She was living in a squalid apartment in Hollywood. And I, had been in Hollywood. I moved to Hollywood in 85. I met Holly in 88. I was kind of like this aspiring screenwriter who was desperate for a break. And I decided that the only way I was going to get a break was if I made a movie myself. And so I coerced Holly into being in a film that I wanted to make, to launch my career.
And that's when you were introduced by our mutual friend, Beverly Osborne, a.k.a. the lovely Carol, right?
That's right.
So tell us the story of how that meeting occurred. What were the circumstances?
Okay, so I was working as a secretary at this big PR firm. It was huge. Huge meaning we handled legendary clients, Barbara Streisand, Frank Sinatra, Whitney Houston, Michael Jackson. It was top notch. And Beverly called me up one day and she said, Jeff, I'm hosting this party in Santa Monica for my friend Dory Hanaway, and I need a cameraman. Can you come out and run a camera for me? I'm doing this red carpet thing with the guests as they arrive. And I said, well, sure. So I drove out to Santa Monica and unfortunately could not figure out how to work the camera. Couldn't get the focus. It was a nightmare. And Beverly just said, oh, forget it. Just put that camera down and go to the buffet. And so I go over to the buffet and I'm hanging out, and my friend Tom Bate was there, who you might know.
Mm-hmm.
He was also involved with Beverly as a writer. And we're sitting there chatting, and I see this strange looking person, very androgynous, across the way. And I was trying to discern, is that a man or is that a woman? Who is that? What is that? And I asked Tom, I said, who is that over there? And he said, oh, that's Holly Woodlawn. She's an Andy Warhol superstar. And I was like, wow. So I actually never met Holly that night. I didn't meet Holly that night, but Holly stayed on my mind. And it wasn't until the next night, I was in West Hollywood. I'd gone to Video West. And I don't know if you remember this, but in Video West, there was this little gossip rag called the Hollywood Kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked up the Hollywood Kids because it was so much fun to read. And Holly Woodlawn was on the cover. And so I flipped it open. I read Holly's interview. I read all, learned all about her. And I thought, wow, she'd be a real interesting person to put in this movie I want to make, because I think she'd garner a lot of publicity. I was very geared toward marketing and PR because I was surrounded by that,
So did you have a movie already in mind, or did the idea of the movie come about after you met Holly?
I had a movie in mind, but when I met Holly, when I read that article and learned about Holly, I thought, okay, I could tailor-make a part especially for her, okay? And it was going to be a black and white kind of gritty Charles Bukowski drama. Because that's really the kind of stories I gravitated toward.
Mm-hmm.
I love the movie Barfly, Ironweed. I was very much into dramas. And I loved, edgy avant-garde cinema. So, and Holly came from that world.
Right.
And so my intent was to, direct this movie that I would write that would get a lot of attention and would launch my career. And the reason why I was even inspired to do that is because I had written a full-length horror script, and it had gotten developed and filmed, shot, not as a full-length movie, but as a 30-minute short. And it launched the filmmaker's career. It did nothing for mine, So I thought, well, you just can't sit back and let other people get all the breaks. You've got to create your own now. So that's what inspired it, got that ball rolling. And then so I tracked Holly down and asked her out to dinner. And I took her to the French marketplace, the French Quarter restaurant. And, at the time, I drove this flashy red Pontiac Fiero. The worst mistake I'd ever made buying that car because it was so expensive. But I roll up in this flashy car, and Holly mistook it for a Ferrari. And she thought I was a well-heeled movie producer who could, do
Launch her
something
career.
right, relaunch her
Yeah.
career. So that's how that ball got rolling.
So were you first writing the script? Obviously, you were writing a script for the movie with her, and then that evolved into becoming the book. Is that right?
Yeah, well, what happened was, I was so ignorant back then on how things really worked. Bruno, I don't know if you experienced this, but when I got to Hollywood, it was extremely hard
Hmm.
to get a job. And I was always pulling some crazy stunt to get noticed, right? And, like I had this whole gimmick where I was sending out these letters to people, like to Pee Wee Herman. Congratulations, Pee Wee Herman. This is your lucky day. You just won Jeff Copeland and a PA, production assistant clearinghouse giveaway. That goofy little gimmick landed me a gig at Paramount Pictures.
See?
So it all paid off. But I worked at Paramount for 3 years. I couldn't get a break. I worked on a show called Brothers, which
Oh, with
was,
my friend Brandon Maggart.
did you know Brandon?
He and I did Fiddler on the West Hollywood Roof together for Charity Parody, where I played Uncle Pinky, which was the gay version of Grandma Seidel.
That's
So yes,
wonderful.
Brandon and I have been kept very close over the years. Yes, indeed.
Wow. Well, so, and I worked on that show. He was wonderful. That entire cast was great.
It was a great show too. It was groundbreaking for its day.
Well, the irony was it was, yeah, a groundbreaking series with two lead gay characters uh, who were straight.
Right?
The truth is, the show was run by straight men.
Isn't that
And
interesting?
yeah, and I didn't feel comfortable being out. So I was very closeted because no one was gay except for the gay consultant who they brought in,
Who was that? Who was the gay consultant?
Danny Kreitzberg.
Wow.
Yeah. And, he was a writer, and I, I don't have much memories of Danny. Unfortunately, Danny got AIDS,
Oh.
that era.
Yes, we do. We lived right through all that, sweetheart.
Right. And I remember him collapsing in the parking lot.
Oh,
It was a nightmare. And having to, I guess I took him home. I can't remember, but it was a very terrifying time. And I forgot where I'm even going with
you
this.
were working at Paramount.
Oh, I'm working at Paramount. Couldn't get a break. I'm working on a gay TV show. I can't be out, And
Did you
what
ever come out
happened?
to him?
I don't think I ever did.
Wow, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Um, but the whole point of this was there I am working at a major movie studio with all these major players, okay? And I can't get anyone to pay attention to me as a writer, give me a break, Um, and I got frustrated. And that's the reason why I wrote the script for Holly. Um, oh, it was all about me being ignorant. There I am, major movie studio, and I am so ignorant on how scripts are submitted, how money is raised. I didn't go to a big film school. I didn't understand how these pieces work. So what I did was I created this package with my script, the script I wrote for Holly, and I included Holly's press kit. She had a very impressive press kit, and she had a beautiful 8x10 glossy. So I created this package and I sent it out to literary agencies because I thought a literary agent would recognize the value in this property and want to help me raise money. I mean, how stupid is that? That is not how it works. But I didn't know any better. And what happened serendipitously is that uh, this young apprentice, his name was Robert Drake, he was working at this little agency on Melrose. And he saw Holly's photograph staring at him from a trash can.
Oh,
And he went over and he fished it out. And there's Holly's photo, her press kit, my script, my letter. And he reads it and he calls me on the phone at the PR agency. And he says, we don't represent screenwriters at this agency. We represent book authors. And I think there's a book in Hollywood Lawn. Can you help me get in touch with her? I think he actually said, can you give me her phone number? Well, Holly's phone had been disconnected that week,
of course.
right? So I said, you know what? I'll go over to her apartment and I'll have her call you. So I get off work. I run over to Holly's apartment. She lived over across from Park Cherokee, on Cherokee and DeLongpre. And long story short, Holly's not answering the bell. And, it's gated, so I can't get in to bang on her door. But I get the attention of this old guy I see walking across the lawn behind the gate. And I wave to him and I call him over and I say, hey, I'm trying to find my friend Holly Woodlawn, and she's not answering her, the buzzer. And he said, Holly Woodlawn's gone. And good riddance. She was 2 months behind on the rent. Turns out he was the apartment manager. And he had no idea where she went. He was just glad he didn't have to deal with her anymore. So, what do you do with that? Miss Woodlawn vanished. And so did my future.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So, and this is like 1988, right? And there's no internet. How do you find people?
Right.
I had no idea where Holly. So I started calling people, trying to track her down. And eventually, I think it took about a week for me to find somebody in Las Vegas who had Holly's parents' phone number in Miami.
Wow.
All her parents. And so I did. And her father answered the phone. And I said, hi, my name is Jeff Copeland. I'm trying to find Holly Woodlawn. And I heard him say, well, hold on. And I heard this rustling in the background and who? And you know how it is when people are talking. And then Holly gets on the phone and she's not even really happy to hear from me. I think the first thing out of her mouth is, Jeffrey, I can't make your movie. Had to come back here and make money because her father was a tax accountant and he had hired Holly to do some work at home with him.
Now, did his parents know that he was Holly Woodlawn? Or did his parents just know him? Oh my gosh, I can't remember what Holly's real name was.
Harold.
Right. So they knew all the stuff that had gone on with his early other alternate ego?
They did.
Okay.
I was very curious about this. I was like, what kind of parents have Holly Woodlawn? You know what I mean? And they were very nice, conservative, just really sweet people. And I think what fascinated me about Holly is that, Holly ran away from home when, he was a boy, right?
Mm-hmm.
15 years old. He was about 15 years old, ran away from home and hitchhiked took a bus to Georgia as far as he could get. And he was with his friend Russell. And then they hitchhiked from Georgia all the way to Manhattan.
Wow. And this was from Florida, right? He grew up in Florida?
This was Florida, from Miami.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was kind of a harrowing journey. And then Russell freaked out and wound up, getting money from his grandmother and hightailing it home. And Holly stayed there on the streets in Times Square, lived in a park, had to prostitute to survive. I mean, this is some really heavy shit.
At 15 years old, that's very heavy shit.
Right. And you know, with all this upset in our culture now, especially politically, with all the lack of interest and inclusion and diversity, I think Holly Woodlawn's story shows the importance of that. Because had Holly Woodlawn not, you know, felt like such a misfit when he was a 15-year-old gay kid, right? He would run away from home. If he could stay in Miami, it was the same way with me. If I could stay where I grew up, I would have. But, you know, we were treated like shit. If you were gay, you were fucked.
So,
And that's what propelled Holly to go to New York so she could be, you know, create a better life for herself.
did
Holly
you
was
ever have a discussion with Holly about how Harold became Holly? Was that something that Warhol did, or had Holly already come up with that persona before she got involved with Andy Warhol?
Well, Holly was fascinated with Breakfast at Tiffany's. Go Lightly, okay? She loved that movie. So that's where the name Holly came. And Holly became Holly early on when Holly was a 15-year-old kid. You know, that's when he became Holly. Woodlawn came about one night when she was hanging out with her friends in the village, and they were doing speed and watching I Love Lucy and trying to come up with a name.
Like one does.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and they lived, Holly's lifestyle was insane. But long story short, they see Woodlawn on the TV screen because in this episode of I Love Lucy, she's got a loving cup, you know, stuck on her head. She's on the Woodlawn line subway. And they got the idea that, hey, if it took Holly and bridged it with Woodlawn, it's a play on Hollywood. That would be a great name for you as an Andy Warhol superstar. So that's where that came from.
Got it.
Yeah. So I think she was, it's funny, I ran across an old program from Heaven, Grand, and Amber Orbit, a play that Jackie Curtis did, and Holly's listed in the program, and she was Holly Woodlawn then. So that's about 1969.
Wow.
And that's about when she was hustling Warhol to be a superstar. And the reason why she wanted to be a superstar is because her friends Jackie and Candy were superstars.
Candy Darling, right?
Right. So Holly wanted to get in on that too.
So, when you were collaborating on Low Life and High Heels, how did you write that? Actually, you wrote that together, or did Holly just like dictate to you and let you do like all the writing of the book?
Well, what would happen is Holly would come over to I wound up moving in with Holly, not in the same apartment, but next door to each other. We had adjacent apartments. And so she would come over and she would hang out on the sofa, and I would sit there at the computer and I would have a tape player running. And we would have an idea of the story was broken down. We had a proposal, right? That I'd written based on her life. It was all structured. So if we were going to talk about, say, the making of the movie Trash, Holly, I would say, okay, this chapter's about trash. Let's talk about this. And she would, start talking about it. And then
now it should be working really, really well.
Okay. He was just a couple seconds behind, but not bad. Okay, good.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Something happened.
That's okay. Audio difficulties. Now we're back.
That's okay. So she didn't dictate it. She would just start talking. A matter of fact, it was when we first got together to write the first chapter, you see, where I got a tape recorder and me and Holly just started walking all over Hollywood. And I held the tape recorder up to her mouth and I just interviewed her. And, tell me about this, tell me about this. And so that's pretty much how the book got written, is I would just fire off questions, Holly would talk. And then what I would, I'm taking notes and I had the tape as backup. And then what I would do is I would take those notes and I would craft them into a chapter.
And then how long did it take you to actually edit all that down?
Well, so the proposal, I think that took probably about 3 months to get done. And once we got our book deal with St. Martin's Press, we were under a deadline. So I was writing a chapter a week.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I'm working a full-time job. So I would write at night and on weekends. Saturdays and Sundays were my big writing days. So it was pretty quick, which is why the book, A Low Life in High Heels, as fun as it is, it's not a well-written book.
Well,
it's just a ball.
It is, but it's a wild ride. It's a great read because if you number one, if you kind of like have sort of heard about who Holly Woodlawn was, and you get to read the details in it, it's a great. Everybody wants to know what that story is about, and it's this wild ride of her life story.
Yeah, it was. I got to tell you, it was a fun story, and I knew the very first day Holly and I started working together, I had to write an audition chapter. Okay, so that was the first day we got together, and I was interviewing Holly, and then I went back to my one-room apartment on Fountain. I lived on Fountain and Wilcox back then, and I'm transcribing and putting everything together, and this is before computers. Well, before I could afford a computer, I had a fashion typewriter and using real tape and scissors to cut and paste.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I got that first chapter put together, I thought, holy shit, this is gold. I knew this story has got all the elements of an award-winning film. It was just rich.
So in your mind, the whole entire relationship and the whole entire thing was it to get the film done. So the books were kind of like an afterthought and not really your first primary goal, right? Is that right?
Well, yeah, I never wanted to write a book, but what happened was the book came out of nowhere, this opportunity to write a book,
Mm-hmm.
and the agency actually had another writer in mind to write it.
Oh.
Okay. And Holly, I begged Holly. I just said, Holly, please let me have a chance. I just want a chance to do this. I know I can do it. And so she went to the agency and she said, because I'd done so much work to get her back to Los Angeles,
Mm-hmm.
right? That they said, okay, you have a week. And they gave me, a timeline, and I just ran with it and knocked it out of the park. I mean, I remember that first chapter, and I remember when I came up with the end of that first chapter, the last paragraph, because what people don't understand is there's a lot of work that goes into crafting a story,
Mm-hmm.
goes into crafting those lines, and because I was a screenwriter, well, I was an aspiring screenwriter, but I knew how to write dialogue, and I knew how to craft a compelling scene. So the book came about because I was hustling for an agent to help me raise money for a movie, right? I latched onto the Hollywood Lawn book because when I realized it was this incredible story, I negotiated in my collaboration agreement, in my deal, that, I mean, I was very upfront. The only reason why I'm writing this book is I want to secure those film rights.
Mm-hmm.
Because I wasn't stupid, you know? I knew, I mean, I might have been stupid on how to raise money, but I knew the importance of copyright.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that that if I, you know, written the book, that it would launch my screenwriting career. Well, that's what I thought.
Right. And what didn't that come up as an issue because Low Life and High Heels, it says with Jeff Copeland as opposed to co-written by or authored. So that's a difference in what? What's the difference between saying, you know, it's a Low Life and High Heels by Hollywood Lawn with Jeff Copeland as opposed by written by Hollywood Lawn and Jeff Copeland?
Well, you know what? Here's the deal. So when we got together, I hammered out the first chapter, and that's when we knew we were onto something. Mm-hmm. And so we had to hammer that out in our deal, our collaboration agreement. Mm-hmm. And I was given a choice on what I wanted. Well, I adored Holly. Holly was my best friend. And you have to understand, a lot of people didn't believe in Holly. People who I worked with at the public relations firm said she was a mess. I had so many outside sources saying that I was wasting my time. And I adored Holly. I thought she was wonderful, and I wanted to elevate her. So in my mind, with seemed like the best way to do that, because it made it look like she, you know, was writing. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, Holly never wrote. Holly couldn't write. It was the very last thing we wrote, which was her acknowledgments at the end of A Low Life and High Heels. And I said, and I was exhausted. And I said, you write this, okay? I can't write this. This has to come from your heart. Well, you know, she did, and it was a disaster. So I had to rewrite it. You know,
hence the with Jeff Copeland part.
I mean, it was just so, but Bruno, no one was guiding me. No one was saying, hey, Jeff, you know what? This is the credit you want. Mm-hmm. Right? There was no guidance. And I was just trying to figure out the best thing for Holly. And I didn't really care because, you see, for me, the most important thing was the copyright. It doesn't say with Jeff Copeland on the copyright.
What does the copyright say? Or is that a Hollywood secret?
It says and.
Oh, it does say and. Okay.
Absolutely.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. So, speaking of other famous people and having money come into it, how did this get into the hands of Madonna? What's the Madonna connection?
Well, Harvey Fierstein actually writes about this in his book. So, here's the deal. When Madonna formed Maverick, okay, I went to Holly, and I write all about this. I went to Holly and I said, listen, Madonna is forming this company. She's looking for unique independent films. This is perfect. Holly thought that was the stupidest idea. She's like, oh, Madonna, who cares? Oh. So I went to our agent, and I said, Robert, we got to get this book to Madonna. Well, Robert was like, no. And I thought, what the fuck is wrong with these people? So I sent Madonna the book. I just said, this is bullshit. I'm going to send her a heartfelt letter and send her this book. Well, fuck me. You know what happens when you reach out to somebody? There's so much red tape
True.
and bullshit. So I think it got thrown away. I never heard anything about it until several months later when Liz Smith broke in her column that Harvey Fierstein and a producer named Howard Rosamond, very well-respected producer. So you got a major Broadway playwright, major Hollywood producer, have taken this story to Madonna, and she has flipped for it. And suddenly, A Lowlife in High Heels is all over the world. Because when Madonna attaches herself to your project, I mean, that's huge publicity. So that's how it got to Madonna. Harvey Fierstein paved the way. And I basically got thrown under the bus.
Yikes.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal.
See, and that's brought up the time. That's when I first met Holly, because she was doing a book signing at the wonderful French Market. And I was writing my Tea with Bruno column for Nightlife magazine. And that was one of the things that they said, okay, this is something I wanted to cover. And that's my first encounter with meeting Holly. And it's one of those things, like you say, you meet Holly and you just get swept up in the magic of Hollywood Lawn. And we had a blast. I can't even remember me turning the recording on of that, actually getting our conversation to put the article in there to get the blurb, which graciously you put in the book, of me talking about her ill-fated entree into the cabaret world at the back lot of Studio One. But at that time, the book was a huge thing. I remember it was a big deal.
It was a big deal. It was very vindicating because I had, when I was working at that major PR firm, I thought, well, perhaps I'll become a publicist. And I was jonesing for a promotion because there was a position available for a junior publicist. And I was denied it. And when I asked, the office manager said, well, sorry, but you can't write. Lots of people told me I couldn't write. Well, motherfuckers, here's the deal. I don't give tough shit if I can't write. The point is I want to write, and I'm going to write.
And, good for you for sticking up for yourself and doing it. Because a lot of people, especially in Hollywood, when the doors slam in your face and people tell you that you're one thing, you say, okay, well, I guess I am that. I guess I'm not a writer. I guess I'm not this person. We were both there, kicking and scratching to make a living, make a livelihood. And you really, stuck to your guns and didn't believe the crap that was thrown your way, which is commendable.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's why A Low Life in High Heels meant so much to me, because it did get published. It got published by a major publisher, and then paperback rights went to Harper Perennial. That's a major publisher. But the big upsetting thing for me was the fact that, I wrote that book to launch my career, to launch my writing career. It did nothing for my writing career. Wow. And it was a mess. And then Holly, I write all about it in the book. Things just didn't go well, unfortunately. The success of that book. Okay, now I basically backed off and said, okay, Harvey Fierstein, Howard Rosamond, Columbia Pictures, I am so grateful, truthfully, that people of that caliber are interested in something that I've, helped create. That's a big deal. So I, backed off. But then other shit went down. That was so unlike my control. And
in the end, the whole project was scrapped, right?
well, it took, yeah, at Columbia Pictures, it fell apart. It was just a disaster, Michael. It was, and I don't even, I kind of scratched the surface on it in Love You Madly Hollywood Lawn, because there were many valiant attempts to make a Low Life in High Heels into a movie. But, I think what happened was Tu Wong Fu, thanks for, what is it? Tu Wong Fu, fuck you, Julie Newmar, whatever.
Original title, working title. Fuck you, Julie Newmar.
Tu Wong Fu came out, and then Priscilla, Queen of the Desert.
Yeah, and those are big, huge studio productions.
Huge. And it just blew a Low Life in High Heels out of the water.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, because you have to understand, these are two movies about drag queens. And Holly was never a drag queen.
Right.
She wasn't. People always mistake her for a drag queen. That wasn't her. So we were just fucked. And so I wound up going into television and doing science documentaries for the Discovery Channel.
There's a left turn for you.
I know. And the reason why, I wrote Love You Madly Hollywood Lawn is because that was a real shitty situation, right? That happened. I pretty much lost my friendship with Holly.
Right.
We were very close. And then when that happened, it just created I could never go back to the way it was,
Well, then she had also gotten very ill in the last couple of years of her life, right?
Well, Holly's alcoholism took hold. You see, when Holly was living with me at Las Palmas, I mean, I had a firm hand as far as like keeping her on the straight and narrow. Whenever that alcoholism reared its ugly head, I was right there to straighten it out. She needed routine. She needed positive energy. She didn't need a bunch of sycophants coming around saying, "Oh, you're fabulous. You're Hollywood Lawn. You don't have to work." Well, no, she did have to work. She needed that stability. She needed, to be grounded. Otherwise, she would start drinking Chardonnay. She'd fall apart. She'd unravel. And that's essentially what happened. In the end, because Holly, when we were working together, Holly went to FIDM. She went to school. She got her degree in fashion design. And it's a tragic shame that Holly didn't do anything with it. But Teresa Conboy can tell you all about that. Teresa was a really good friend of mine who I actually knew Teresa from the PR firm. And Teresa wound up managing Holly. And Holly went to live with Teresa in Silver Lake. And I kind of divorced myself from Hollywood Lawn. And I still cared about Holly, but I couldn't go down that slippery slope of codependence and alcoholism and wasn't going to do that.
And you're right. I mean, there comes a point where, when you're in that kind of, a codependent situation like that, you end up, being the caregiver, and then who's really taking care of you? Right?
Well, yeah, you wind up getting screwed.
Yeah, true. Welcome to Hollywood.
Right. Now, I have a question for you, Michael, because we both were in Hollywood during the 80s. What is your favorite Hollywood experience? Your favorite memory?
My favorite, wow, there's so many of them. I think you and I talked about this the other day when I actually got a job as a contestant coordinator on High Rollers. And it was at the CBS Television City. And it was on the stage. We taped the show on the stage where Carol Burnett did the Carol Burnett show. So it was like I was in awe and in heaven, thinking I'm standing on hallowed ground and I'm getting paid, to work on game shows and, and have the time of my life, putting people on a show where they're going to win lots of cash and prizes, and, and walking around the halls of places where, Hollywood celebrities that I grew up watching on TV. I'm standing in these places. I'm working in this place. And then fortunately, the studio next to ours is where they were doing Win, Lose, or Draw. And then the daytime version of Win, Lose, or Draw came on because of the popularity of the nighttime version was with Vicki Lawrence as the host. So as we were coming through the hallways and going back and forth, I, being myself, had introduced myself and said, I'm working on High Rollers with Wink Martindale next door, and I just adore you, and I think you're wonderful. And I was gushing and being a fangirl like crazy. And she was so kind and so wonderful. And she's like, you know what? You're in the business. You're a colleague. And I'm like, I'm a colleague. Oh my God. It was amazing. And she introduced me to all the celebrities that were coming on Win, Lose, or Draw in the daytime. So when Carol Burnett came on, I got to meet Carol Burnett, who was so gracious. Of course, I fangirled over her and said, I can't believe I'm talking to you in the place where I watched you, doing the Carol Burnett show, which was my lifelong dream to be on the Carol Burnett show. So those memories of working at Television City are some of my fondest memories, and made some of my fondest friendships working on that show. So that's that, and probably writing Tea with Bruno was always fun because I got to meet and interview people like Holly, people like like Charles Pierce, people like Rudy De La Moore. I got to do things where I didn't consider myself to be a writer. I was always an actor and a comedian, and suddenly I found myself writing a weekly gossip column in a big, West Hollywood, gay rag. And it was the time of my life because I got in to see every show. I got to meet all these great people, got to meet and interview the Golden Girls, became really good friends with Estelle Getty. It was just an amazing time of my, spent because of the fact that I got on a game show, won some money, and was good at playing games. And suddenly I'm thrown into the game show world when game shows were really hot in the 80s. And they were all celebrity based. So, these all became people that I could then interview because I had this great, access to the press. Plus, I was also really fortunate in that, at that time, because we were all in the horrors of living with AIDS and HIV, APLA and Aid for AIDS would hire me to host a lot of their shows. So in those connections became like, oh yeah, I can bring you scripts that are signed by the Golden Girls, or I can, Brandon Maggart became a friend, so he had scripts from Brothers that he saved. So I would get all this great, stuff to auction off at really big benefits that I was fortunate enough to MC and to work on. So those were really kind of like, those were my golden years of my memories of the good part of, like you say, when you're on the inside looking around, it's like, oh my gosh, this is like a reality. When I first get there, it's like, I'm never going to be able to walk into a studio. I didn't have any idea that was going to be where my career path would go. But, thanks to game shows, that's kind of like, how it all came about.
That's amazing. The 80s were really glorious.
They were. I think they truly were. They truly were like the end of that era. And then I left in the mid 90s to go to San Francisco to start producing and company managing live theater again. So I kind of put all that behind me because by the 90s, reality TV had set in. And all the awful Love Connection and Studs and all the really miserable dating shows were happening, and all the reality shows were coming in. It's like, I didn't want to work on those. It was like, I don't really think I'm, kind of done with all that. So fortunately, I got, exactly. Got to San Francisco and started doing theater, which was my first calling because I, had been doing theater since I was a teenager. So I think I got out at the right time to get to San Francisco and do some really fun theater. And now I
think he
can't
did.
even imagine living and working in Hollywood at all.
It's a different game. I have to show you something here. I found this. Speaking of the 80s, my lovely Carol.
Oh, my lovely Carol.
So cool. You know, my favorite Hollywood memory, I think for me, the golden time was when I was working as a production assistant at Paramount. Because that studio was so beautiful.
That was
This is
beautiful, beautiful
like
studio.
1986 and 1988. And it was during that time when I had written this little horror movie. And it was it was a script that I was trying to get people to read. And the lead role I envisioned for Shelley Winters, because I was a huge fan of hers. One day, Saturday morning, I'm at Ralph's Supermarket on, let's see, 3rd Street and San Vicente. And I'm standing in the express lane, and there's this little disheveled woman, okay, standing in front of me. And she turns around with this little plastic bag of nuts. And she says, "Honey, can you open this bag of nuts for me? Plastic has ruined the world." And I'm thinking, holy shit, this is Shelley Winters. And I about fell over. I didn't recognize her face. I recognized her
The
voice.
voice. Yep. The voice.
And long story short, she got kicked out of line because she had too many items. Can you believe it? And she just I opened the bag for her, and she graciously moved on. As she was going, I whispered, I said, "Oh my God, I'm such a fan of your work." And she said, "Oh, thank you, honey." And so I go out to the parking lot, and I'm thinking, oh shit, I've got to get Shelley Wiener, Shelley Wiener, Shelley Winters to read my script. So catch her as she's coming outside the market, and I tell her, "Oh, I wrote the script. I would love for you to look at it." And she invites me over to her house.
You're kidding. Oh my God.
It was like incredible. And so I went over to her duplex on Oakhurst, which was near Chase's, and hung out with her in her living room talking about the script.
Oh my
was
gosh.
Yeah, and you know what was so cool about Shelley Winters? She was just very direct and very honest. And I told her about my story, and she said, "You know, honey, I've done enough horror in my career. I really want to do drama." And so I went home and wrote a drama for Shelley Winters. Can you believe it?
And what became of that?
Where?
What
At least
became
I
of
tried.
that?
It's in a drawer someplace.
Oh.
This was before I met Holly Woodlawn. You know, when I first wrote Love You Madly, Holly Woodlawn, it was called Hollywood Bust. And it was really, Holly Woodlawn was a big part of it, but she didn't come in until page 160. And those first 160 pages were all the stories about all the incredible people I met and all the crazy shit that happened, you know, all that led to me to want to write a book about Holly Woodlawn. So, and then,
love it.
you know, I couldn't sell it, so it got reconfigured.
Right.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I could talk to you for forever. It's like going down, strolling down memory lane. And the odd thing is again, our lives, crossed so many times, but I think we only were ever in the same room, maybe 2 or 3 times at the same time at that point, because of our connection, of us both knowing Beverly. And the connection with Holly, but it's like we never really, and we're always at the French Market. And I probably spent most of my life living when I was in West Hollywood. Every single afternoon, brunch, and night ended up at the French Market, either there or the Yukon Mining Company, where I met Shelley Winters, which is a whole other Tom Orr story.
What happened?
We were sitting in the booth, and Tom nudges me and he goes, "That's Shelley Winters. That's Shelley Winters." Well, this elderly woman in a big muumuu with a wig kind of cocked to one side and a big shopping bag, which she was putting all the jellies and all the sweet and low and all the sugars in. And I'm like, Tom, that is so not Shelley Winters. Shut up. And of course, me with being, a loudmouth Italian that I am, she of course hears me saying that, and she turns around and she says, I am Shelley Winters. And whole place just kind of burst out laughing. This whole little scene was going on. That was my close encounter with Shelley Winters. I didn't get invited over to her house, so I'm very jealous of the fact that you got to go over to her house.
Did you know Skippy Lowe?
Oh my God, Skippy Lowe. Oh Lord. Oh,
Lord is right.
Lord help me. Yes, I knew Skippy Lowe. Yes.
Skippy Lowe scared me. He actually tried to get me to write his life story, and I graciously declined.
Good. They were good for you. Good for you.
He was a little bitter for my taste.
Oh, bitter. He was a scary queen. Ooh, he was a scary queen.
Oh, hey, speaking of Shelley Winters, I got to show you this. Look, this. Can you see this? That's Shelley Winters.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Sally Kirkland and Holly Woodlawn.
Wow, what a great picture.
Isn't that great?
That's a wonderful picture.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
I love it. So, Jeff, I decided that your next book should be The Life and Times of Michael Bruno.
Oh, and I know
I can tell you stories, more Shelley Winters stories about my life in the porn industry. I mean, things that people don't even know about us.
Oh my God,
your chapter 11 will be my chapter 11.
Oh my goodness, we'll need safety goggles to get through it. I'm sure
that's very, very true. Yes. Elbow length gloves and safety goggles.
Hilarious.
Jeff, this has been so wonderful. Make sure that you go and get I love you madly, Hollywood Lawn. It's a fascinating read. You will love it. We'll see you next time on Showbiz Buzz with Bruno. Love you, Jeff. Thank you. Take care of yourself.
Thank you, Michael.
He's still here.